If we're not careful, we begin to notice that fear starts to cause challenge in all of our key relationships, alienating people and pushing them further and further away. As a result of that, our fears actually become true and we start to feel more lonely and more disconnected and more alienated. It's only when we come across perhaps ancient wisdom and we read into and understand how that ancient wisdom can guide us forward that we can begin to unpick the knots that fear has caused in our relationships and transcend and evolve beyond them. Welcome everyone to today's video. I'm glad to see you here once again, and as you probably know, this month we are getting into the topic of fear, or what is known as abhinivesha in the yoga tradition, or specifically from the Yoga Sutras. And what I wanted to talk about today was the way that fear, if we're not careful, and if it's unconscious, which for many of us it is, can actually start to cause problems in all of our closest relationships. And as a result of that, it starts to allow us to feel, or it makes us feel even more alienated and lonely, rather than actually protecting us in the way that we think it does. So let's get into that. So what tends to happen in relationships is that in order for us to protect ourselves to a certain degree and in a way that we think it does, we start to respond to certain things in these relationships in a way that projects a sense that we have control and in a way that projects a sense that we are strong in those situations. Essentially, that is the opposite of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and actually speaking truth to the people that are closest to us so that they begin to understand us at a deep, deep level, rather than actually continuing to push them away through some kind of alter ego that has developed in order to protect ourselves from our deepest fears. But the reality is that the more we do that, the more we push people away. I'd like to talk about why that is. So for example, imagine that there is something within us that feels particularly fearful of a particular situation or circumstance that may or may not be present, that may or may not arise within a relationship with another person. Now we may find that in a particular situation, rather than expressing our truth in that moment, we may actually express anger or annoyance towards that person as simply a way of not even wanting to touch the truth of the situation. So let me give you an example. Our daughter, who is 3 years old, has suffered from various medical issues and conditions since she was born, and this continues to be something that is present in our lives. Now, as a result of having a child that is susceptible to potential illnesses or potential health issues, it means that one has to be quite sensitive and be aware of how that child is feeling in any given moment. Because if you're not careful, when you take your eye off the ball, then you may find that actually their situation can deteriorate quite rapidly if you're not careful. But at the same time, one doesn't want to descend into a well of fear where the whole time, whenever you're with your child, you are conscious of the fact that there might be something wrong. So finding that balance is really hard. Now, if one parent, for example, says to the other parent, "Oh, I think something is wrong with our child, maybe let's do something about it," because of the fear that that induces in the other parent, it's very, very easy for that other parent to completely close down and invalidate the response that the previous parent has given. So rather than responding and saying, "Okay, yes, so what is it that you think is wrong?" It's very easy to respond and say, no, it's fine, you're overreacting, everything's fine in this moment, don't worry about it, let's get on with it." In the process of doing that, what we do is we close down the other person, because what we're doing is, rather than acknowledging our own fear and opening ourselves to the vulnerability of expressing that to the other person, we are actually burying our fear, therefore not giving that person an insight into the fact that we are perhaps as fearful as they are. But not only are we doing that, we are invalidating what they have expressed to ourselves. And as a result of that, we don't make them feel so great about themselves either. In addition to that, through our response of, "Okay, let's just get on with it," it makes us look like we're not even caring and we're not even interested in the well-being of that child, which of course is not true. But in the circumstances where things are happening and one person responds quite quickly, it's very easy for that impression to be given. So what this is an example of is one person not actually expressing their truth, and as a result of that person not expressing their truth, the other person gets the wrong impression about how that person feels, and also gets closed down from the possibility of being with their own feelings in the situation. The challenge is that that's a very, very easy space to fall into in relationships in general, because we don't always feel open enough or strong enough to express our vulnerability. And we don't necessarily want the other person to experience the fact or to know that we are vulnerable. And this is where the yoga wisdom comes in, because what the yoga wisdom tells us from the Yoga Sutras is that actually at all times we should try to be truthful, Satya, the practice of Satya, and we should also try to practice communicating without violence, the practice of Ahimsa. If we are able to align the telling of the truth in any given moment time in a fashion that is non-violent and in a way that is held, if you like, by the practice of karuna or compassion, then we actually may find that we completely transform the situation. Because rather than shutting down the other person in the instance of what I just described, we could say to the person in that moment, yes, I acknowledge that there may be a problem. I'm also feeling quite fearful. And in this moment of time, that fear is actually making me just want to pretend that everything is okay and not even get into this. So I'm actually feeling quite challenged by admitting the fact that there might be something wrong. But with that said, I hear you and I acknowledge you. And let's have a look at this and let's be with it together and assess whether we actually need to do something about it in this moment of time, or actually whether we can just keep a loose and informal eye on it and come back to it later. Now, with that style of communication, we've completely changed the game. We've admitted to the other person that we are holding fear. We've admitted to the other person that we don't feel comfortable being vulnerable in that moment. But even though we don't feel comfortable, we've actually expressed our truth. We've validated the other person because we've acknowledged that what they've said is important and has value. And we've also agreed that we're going to look into the situation. And as a result of that, both people in that relationship and in that communication are able to see that they are on the same page, they are both sharing fear, but they are also practically acting in the moment to do what is right in that moment of time as responsible parents. You can see that as a practice, although this may be difficult at first, it is the key way in which we are actually able to move deeper in love and deeper into connection with the people in our lives. The more we put up the bravado, the more we put up this show of strength that everything is okay, the more that we don't allow people into our inner world and we don't express to them our vulnerability, we don't express to them the fact that we feel fear, that we feel sad, that we feel lonely, we feel frightened, whatever it might be, the more that they get the impression, either one, that we are okay, and as a result of that, we don't need support, or alternatively, and this is probably more the case, people know exactly that there is something wrong, they can tell, but because we're blocking people out by putting up this bravado and this alter ego, they feel that perhaps we don't want to open up to them, or that somehow we don't trust them, or somehow we don't want or need their support in our lives. And as a result of that, we alienate them and we push them away. As a result of that, all of our fears actually start to manifest and become true, because actually, rather than at the very basic human level, this need for love and the way in which we are able to cultivate and manifest love in our lives, rather than actually moving towards that, we end up pushing people away further and further. Now, as someone who struggled for a long time with admitting my vulnerability, this is a practice which I have to work on every single day. Every time I respond in a way that implies that I perhaps don't care as much as I do, every time I try to pretend that perhaps I'm stronger in the face of a situation than I am, I have to remind myself either in the moment or soon after to correct course, to go back to that person, to reveal my truth, to reveal my vulnerability in that moment. And that's something that I've really learned through the ongoing health challenges of our daughter, is the fact that there are times that I feel very balanced and I feel very present and I feel very capable of managing and holding my emotions in a certain way. And there are times when I feel actually very sad and very despairing. And I've learned actually that in those moments, it's far better for me to communicate with the people around me that that's what I'm going through, because otherwise it gives the impression that maybe I'm not handling things so well, or that I'm disconnected from my own emotions, which therefore pushes people away because they're not so sure how to connect. They don't really know the truth of what is going on. And as a result of that, they just back off. And so this is why yogic wisdom is so valuable, because as we talked about, the practice of Ahimsa, the practice of Satya, the practice of non-violence and speaking truth in a way that is non-violent, which is essentially two of the key concepts or foundation stones of yoga philosophy and yoga practice, combined with this effort to slowly but surely cultivate compassion towards ourselves in allowing our truth to be spoken and not trying to hide that truth, but also compassion for other people to know that actually, yes, they too deserve to hear the truth in a way that is compassionate and kind and non-violent. And if we practice this every day and we bring it into our key relationships, we can start on this very day. We will notice over time that the quality of those relationships start to change. And that not only that, we get into a much deeper relationship with understanding our own vulnerabilities, our own fears, but crucially, we understand how to express them, and therefore that energy can move through us and beyond us. Thus, over time, transcending our attachment to those fears and just acknowledging them as passing thoughts or passing emotions that come through us that don't have to determine the actions that we take in that moment of time. So as always, I hope that this video has been clear. I hope this video has been helpful in some way to you, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks for joining. Namaste.